A millionaire saw her black chauffeur sleeping on the street. What she did next left everyone stunned. The cameras caught the exact moment Victoria Ashford's face went pale at the press conference. A CNN reporter had just asked a question she had never imagined she'd have to answer. "Mrs. Ashford, is it true you fired David Thompson without notice, forcing him to sleep on the street during last week's snowstorm?" The Ritz Hotel ballroom, packed with investors and reporters, fell into an eerie silence. Victoria, 52, had built a $200 million real estate empire, her brand wrapped in the spotless image of a philanthropist devoted to social justice. But now, under the glare of national television, the mask was starting to crack. I'm not sure what you're talking about," she stammered, her fingers trembling as they adjusted the pearls at her neck. In the third row, a 35-year-old black man watched her every move with the patience of someone who had been planning for this moment for months. David Thompson kept his face calm, but in his eyes burned the resolve of a man who had lost everything and decided to take it all back. Just 3 weeks earlier, David had still been Victoria's personal driver of 4 years, punctual, discreet, efficient. He knew every route she preferred, every secret meeting, even the whispered phone calls she thought no one could hear. To Victoria, David was almost invisible, just a quiet black employee performing his duties in her world of privilege. Everything changed on one bitterly cold Friday in December. David arrived 15 minutes late after spending the night in the hospital with his 8-year-old daughter, who had suffered a severe asthma attack. He tried to explain, but Victoria brushed it aside with an impatient flick of her hand. "I'm not interested in your personal excuses, David. You either work professionally or you don't," she said without lifting her eyes from her phone. "Pack your things and leave today." David stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to process the words. 4 years of flawless service erased over a completely justified 15-minute delay. "Mrs. Ashford, if I could just security," she barked as if David were a physical threat. "Choose your next words carefully, Thompson. A bad reputation spreads fast in this industry. When he packed his belongings from the staff apartment, yes, she evicted him from his housing too." Something in David hardened. Not anger, but something colder, calculated. For 4 years, he had been the silent driver, hearing everything, seeing everything, remembering everything. Victoria had no idea David was a Howard University business graduate forced to take the driving job to support his daughter and diabetic mother. Nor did she know about his photographic memory and years of quietly studying how the powerful orchestrated their schemes. Back at the press conference, the reporter pressed on. "We have information that Mr. Thompson was found sleeping in his car during the snowstorm, after being dismissed without notice. As someone who claims to be a civil rights advocate, how do you justify this?" Victoria tried to regain her composure, but her voice trembled. "That is a complete distortion of the facts. David Thompson was terminated for cause after repeated procedural violations." That's when David slowly stood. Every eye in the room turned to him. With unnerving calm, he opened a black briefcase and held up several thick folders. "Mrs. Ashford," his voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Are you absolutely sure you want to stick with that version of events?" The color drained from Victoria's face. She recognized some of those documents she thought were safe in her private office. But what truly terrified her was the calm smile on David's lips. It wasn't the smile of a victim, but of a man who had prepared for this moment with surgical precision. If this story has you curious, make sure you're subscribed, because what David has in that briefcase is only the tip of the iceberg in a plan designed to turn the city's most powerful woman into a cautionary tale about the price of stepping on others to climb higher. The tension in the Ritz ballroom was ready to snap. Victoria straightened her blazer and forced a cold smile. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but—" "A stunt," David cut in, his voice sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Ashford, do you remember this phone call?" He held up his phone, and the entire room heard Victoria's voice echo through the hotel's sound system. "I don't care if your daughter's in the hospital, David. People like you always have some tragic excuse. Either you work professionally, or you go back to the ghetto you came from." Silence engulfed the room. The camera zoomed in on Natasha's face, now drained of all color. Reporters began whispering, a few already hammering away at their phones. That That's been edited, taken out of context, she stammered, her voice weak, desperate. David remained calm. Context. Then allow me to provide some. He flipped through his folder, pulling out the medical records of his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, showing she had been admitted to the hospital in the early hours of December 15th for a severe asthma attack. This is the time, 2:37 a.m. He held the file up to the cameras. And this is the message I sent you, informing you of the situation and asking for just 15 minutes to make sure my daughter could breathe before driving you. What Natasha never knew and never cared to find out was who David Thompson truly was. A distinguished business graduate from Howard University, he had walked away from a promising corporate career after his wife's death in a car accident, choosing to raise Sophie alone while caring for his diabetic mother. Taking a chauffeur job wasn't humiliation, it was strategy. David understood that powerful people often spoke freely in front of those they considered invisible like him. For 4 years, he quietly absorbed every conversation, memorized every detail, storing away every shady scheme he overheard from the back seat of that BMW. Ms. Ashford, David continued, do you remember making me work 17 straight hours on my daughter's birthday because of an urgent situation that didn't respect meaningful days? Natasha tried to stand, but her legs were clearly trembling. I never said it exactly like that. Oh, didn't you? David smiled for the first time, but it never touched his eyes. Then perhaps I should help jog your memory with a few more recordings. The CNN reporter, sensing a historic moment unfolding on camera, asked the question everyone wanted to know. Mr. Thompson, how did you gather all this evidence? David turned to him, patient as a teacher, explaining an obvious lesson. When you're treated like furniture for 4 years, people forget that furniture can have eyes, ears, and sometimes a photographic memory. That was when Natasha made her fatal mistake. Driven by the same desperation and arrogance that had carried her for decades, she blurted out, "You're believing a chauffeur. I built an empire. I've donated millions to charity, and you believe him." The room went dead silent. Everyone had just witnessed the mask fall completely. David simply nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed exactly what he'd been waiting for. And it's that mindset, Ms. Ashford, that brought you here today. He turned to the camera, and for the first time, everyone saw the sharp intellect behind the eyes Natasha had dismissed for years. For 4 years, I drove for someone who called herself a philanthropist, yet made employees sleep in their cars during snowstorms. Someone who publicly gave away millions, yet refused to spare 15 minutes to hear out a desperate father. Natasha tried to play one last card. David, we can settle this quietly. I can make you a generous offer. An offer. David let out a laugh, not of amusement, but something darker. Ms. Ashford, you still don't get it. This was never about money. He looked straight at her, and Natasha shivered. In his eyes was something cold, calculated, the kind of look she had seen in major business deals, only now amplified by years of suppressed injustice. Every night I slept in my car after you sent me away. Every meal my daughter skipped because I couldn't afford both food and medicine. Every tear my mother shed, thinking she'd raised a failure. All of that gave me the time to prepare this moment down to the last detail. The investors in the room began to stir. Some were already firing off messages likely to their attorneys. Natasha's reputation, along with anyone tied to her, was collapsing right in front of them. But what truly terrified her was realizing David still hadn't revealed everything inside that black leather briefcase. The calm smile on his lips belonged to a man who had timed every second of this moment, every word, every revelation. For 4 years, she had entirely underestimated the man who drove her car. It was already too late when she realized she had made the biggest mistake of her life, provoking the fury of a man who was not only extraordinarily intelligent, but infinitely patient, with a memory that forgot nothing. Every document he held up, every recording that played, made it clear this was not some spur-of-the-moment confrontation. It was the meticulous execution of a plan forged over months of apparent silence, while beneath the surface it burned with quiet purpose. David Thompson had turned every insult into fuel, every injustice into evidence, every freezing night into the driving force for this very day. And Natasha, with all her arrogance and privilege, finally understood she had not merely underestimated an employee. She had underestimated an opponent playing chess while she thought they were still playing checkers. As Natasha struggled to regain composure under the glare of the cameras, her mind whirred calculating the damage. What she didn't know was that this press conference was no coincidence. It had been planned with the precision of a military operation. 3 weeks earlier, when David had been left stranded in the snow, he hadn't accepted his fate. Sitting on that icy stone bench, shivering while his daughter slept in the back seat of the car, he made the decision that would change everything. Natasha Ashford had chosen the wrong enemy. "Daddy, why can't we go home?" 8-year-old Sophie had asked, still too young to understand why they were sleeping in the car. "Because sometimes sweetheart," David answered, tucking the blanket around her. "People with power think they can step on those they consider less important. But they forget. The underestimated are always the most dangerous." What Natasha would never know was that for the past 2 years, David had meticulously recorded every suspicious conversation, every questionable phone call, every offhand discriminatory remark she let slip from the back seat of that BMW. His extraordinary memory wasn't just for numbers. He remembered every date, every name, every detail of the shady deals she conducted, always assuming her driver was invisible. The very next day, after being thrown out of his home, David sought out someone he only knew by reputation, Rachel Morrison, an investigative journalist at CNN who had spent years trying to expose the games of the real estate elite. At first, Rachel answered the phone with skepticism. But when David began reciting word-for-word conversations between Natasha and corrupt politicians with exact dates and figures, that skepticism quickly turned into genuine interest. "Do you have proof of all this?" Rachel asked during their first secret meeting in a dim Brooklyn cafe. For the first time in weeks, David smiled. "Ms. Morrison, not only do I have proof, I have recordings, photographs of documents she carelessly left in the car, and a memory that has engraved every crime she committed while thinking I was both deaf and blind." Rachel nearly spilled her coffee. "You've been recording her for 4 years. "Not everything," David replied calmly. "Only the parts involving bribery of inspectors, rigging of public bids, and a few especially colorful remarks about keeping certain people in their place." He slid a folder across the table. "This is just a sample." Over the next 3 weeks, Rachel and David worked like a pair of detectives. She verified every scrap of information he provided, cross-checking data, confirming details. What they uncovered was an entire empire built on systemic corruption, institutional discrimination, and arrogance, so great that Natasha had practically documented her own crimes in conversations she believed were private. "David, this isn't just about you being unfairly fired," Rachel told him the week before the press conference. "This is decades of a rotten system she's helped build. You have enough to take down not just her, but 6 politicians and businessmen along with her." But David's plan was even more precise. He didn't just want to expose Natasha, he wanted to do it in the most humiliating way possible, right in front of the people whose approval she craved. The press conference was the perfect stage, a place where she would feel secure and powerful, surrounded by allies and investors. "She's going to try to smear me, say I'm just a bitter driver," David predicted as they laid out the plan. "That arrogance will be her downfall." Rachel smiled. "And when she does, that will be the perfect moment to reveal who you really are and what you know." Back in the Ritz Hotel ballroom, Natasha fell into the exact trap David had anticipated. "You people are going to believe a driver." Her voice dripped with contempt, echoing through the hushed room. David simply nodded as if she had just triggered a trap he'd been waiting to spring. "Thank you for that question, Ms. Ashford, because now I can introduce someone far more credible than a driver." He gestured, and Rachel Morrison rose from the audience, her CNN press badge catching the light. "Ms. Ashford," Rachel said evenly. "I'm Rachel Morrison, investigative journalist. For the past 3 weeks, my team has independently verified every allegation Mr. Thompson has made. Would you like to comment on the fraudulent public housing contracts we've documented? Or perhaps on the bribes paid to City Inspector Johnson?" Natasha's face went pale. She recognized that name instantly. Johnson was her most crucial connection at City Hall, the man who fast-tracked her projects in exchange for hefty consulting fees. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice weak. David calmly flipped through the file, holding up another document. "Mrs. Ashford, do you remember the phone call on March 17th last year? You said, and I quote, 'Johnson, the low-income housing project needs to be approved this week. You know your son needs that scholarship from my foundation, don't you?'" The room fell into absolute silence. A few investors quietly rose from their seats, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the scandal erupting before them. But David wasn't finished. He locked eyes with Natasha, and for the first time she didn't see the obedient employee she had looked down on for 4 years. She saw a man who had turned every insult into motivation, every injustice into evidence, and every moment of being forced to stay invisible into an opportunity to gather information. "The most interesting thing, Mrs. Ashford, is that in all the years I drove for you, you never once asked about my education. You never cared to know why someone with a summa cum laude degree in business from Howard University was working as a chauffeur." He paused, letting the words settle in the air. "If you had asked, you'd have learned that people with exceptional memory and specialized training in systems analysis are very good at spotting behavioral patterns and organizing evidence." It was in that moment that Natasha fully grasped the danger she was facing. This wasn't a disgruntled employee making baseless accusations. This was a trained strategist who had spent 4 years embedded in her life systematically gathering proof of her crimes, while she had treated him like part of the furniture. Rachel Morrison stepped up to the microphone. "And this is only the first phase of the investigation. In the coming week, we'll be releasing documents exposing a network of corruption involving public contracts, bid rigging, and systemic discrimination against minority employees in Natasha Ashford's companies." That was when Natasha made her most desperate mistake. She sprang to her feet, intending to leave the room, but David stopped her with a question that echoed through the hall. "Mrs. Ashford, where are you going? We haven't even gotten to the part about the undeclared taxes from your offshore account in the Cayman Islands." Natasha froze. That information was her most closely guarded secret, known only to her personal accountant. And then, in a wave of horror, she remembered the countless phone calls she had made to that accountant from the back seat of the car, with David sitting only a few feet away. For 4 years, she had treated her driver as if he were invisible, never realizing that every whispered conversation, every document left on the seat, every private exchange had been perfectly preserved in a mind that forgot nothing. Now, under the glare of national television cameras and in front of every investor, she needed to impress Natasha. Ashford finally understood that she hadn't just underestimated an employee. She had underestimated an opponent who had turned her own arrogance into the weapon that would destroy her. And the worst part, looking at the briefcase still packed with documents, was realizing that David hadn't even revealed half of what he knew. The woman who once prided herself on her sharp business instincts had just discovered that for the last 4 years, she had been observed, analyzed, and meticulously documented by someone whose strategy outmatched anything she could have imagined. The mention of that offshore account was the exact moment Natasha realized she wasn't facing a disgruntled subordinate. She was up against a man with enough information to utterly ruin her life. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice trembled, stripped of all conviction. David smiled, a real smile this time, steeped in satisfaction. "You don't know? Then perhaps you need to hear the call from August 23rd when you instructed your accountant to wire $2.7 million to the account number." He paused for dramatic effect. I'm sure you still remember those numbers. The panic in Natasha's eyes was visible even from across the room. She tried to step closer to David, whispering desperately, "What do you want?" "Money I can transfer any amount. Today. Right now." David let out a cold laugh. "Ms. Ashford, for 4 years you paid me exactly $42,000 a year to drive you around while you sat on millions in hidden accounts." "Do you really think this is about money?" Rachel Morrison stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Ms. Ashford, our investigation also uncovered something interesting about the Fifth Avenue housing project. The very one where you stripped 17 black families of their homes using forged documents." Natasha tried to deny it, but David slid another document across the table. "Here's the recording of you telling your lawyer, 'These people can't read a contract. Use the most complicated legal jargon you can find, they'll sign anything.'" The room fell dead silent. Cameras caught every bead of sweat on Natasha's face, every tremor in her perfectly manicured hands. The remaining investors stared at her with a mixture of horror and disgust. "David, please," she pleaded, all her former arrogance gone. "We can talk privately. I can make it right. I'll make it right." David turned toward the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 4 years, this woman has treated me like a piece of furniture. She never once asked for my full name, never knew I had a daughter, never cared that I had to sleep in my car because I couldn't afford rent after paying my mother's hospital bills." He calmly flipped through more documents. "But what I can't stop thinking about is how someone who calls herself a philanthropist could say this." David pressed play on another audio file. Natasha's voice echoed through the hotel ballroom. "These black people need to learn they can't just demand equality. They have to earn the right to share the same space with us." The silence that followed was suffocating. A few people in the room stood and walked out, shame written all over their faces. Camera flashes lit up Natasha's expression, pure, unfiltered shock. That's taken out of context," she cried, her voice shaky and unconvincing. David simply nodded. "Out of context, Ms. Ashford. This recording was made while you were on the phone with your sister discussing why you fired 3 black employees in a single week. Do you want me to play the rest?" Then something unexpected happened. Natasha's phone began to ring nonstop. Texts poured in. She glanced at the screen, her face draining of color. "Oh my God," she murmured as she read. "My investors. They're pulling every single contract." Rachel Morrison stepped up to the microphone. "For the record, this press conference is being broadcast live on CNN. We've already reached over 2 million viewers." Natasha turned to David, eyes brimming with tears of desperation. "You've destroyed my life. It took me 30 years to build this empire." David looked at her with a calm so steady it was almost otherworldly. "Ms. Ashford, I haven't destroyed anything. You've been building your own downfall for 4 years, word by word, while I drove you around. I simply recorded it all." At that moment, 2 men in suits approached. "Ms. Ashford, we're from the IRS. We need to speak with you about some irregularities in your tax filings." Natasha looked around the room in panic, searching for an ally, a friendly face. But the remaining investors all stared back at her with the same contempt she had shown David for the past 4 years. "How?" she whispered, looking at David. "How did you get all of this?" David slowly closed his briefcase and stood. For the first time in 4 years, he looked down on her, not in height, but in morality. "Ms. Ashford, for 4 years, you completely underestimated me. You never asked about my education. You never once wondered why someone with my qualifications would choose to be your driver." David paused, letting each word sink in. "If you had ever asked, you would know that people with a background in business and a photographic memory are particularly good at 2 things: identifying patterns of crime and building airtight cases against those who think they can trample others without ever facing the consequences." The sound of police sirens echoed outside the hotel. Natasha turned toward the window, spotting multiple squad cars pulling up. "David," she pleaded one last time. "I can change. I'll be better. Please." David looked at her with a mix of pity and resolve. "Ms. Ashford, for 4 years, I've listened to you insult not just me, but dozens of others, employees, suppliers, anyone you deemed beneath you. You had 4 years to choose to be a better person. He turned toward the cameras. True justice is not about revenge. It's about making sure innocent people will never again have to suffer at the hands of those who abuse their power. As federal agents approached with the arrest warrant, Natasha finally grasped the true scale of her downfall. In just a few hours, she had lost her company, her reputation, her freedom, and most devastating of all, the respect it had taken her decades to build. David stood watching as she was led out of the ballroom, the handcuffs on her wrists, catching the camera flashes. For 4 years, she had treated him like he was invisible. Now, in a cruel twist of fate, she would be the one disappearing from the society she once valued so highly, while he stood as a symbol of dignity and strategic brilliance. Yet, as Natasha faced the consequences of decades of arrogance and prejudice, one question lingered. Was the downfall of a tyrant enough to heal the wounds of those who had silently endured? Or were there deeper lessons about justice and redemption still waiting to be uncovered? 6 months later, David Thompson sat in his new office on the 23rd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, gazing out at the city through the panoramic window. As CEO of the Social Justice Foundation he had founded with the proceeds from selling the rights to his story, he had transformed the experience into a platform to help exploited workers. Natasha Ashford, meanwhile, was serving a 5-year prison sentence for tax evasion and corruption. Her assets had been seized, her contracts voided, her reputation obliterated. The woman who once saw David as invisible was now nothing more than a number in the prison system. "Dad, do you regret exposing her like that?" Sophie asked over dinner in their new apartment. David smiled, pulling his daughter into his arms. "Princess, I didn't destroy Natasha Ashford. I simply showed the world who she really was behind her philanthropic mask." Real revenge was never about humiliating her. The goal was to build something better than anything she could ever have created. David's foundation had helped more than 200 workers escape abusive employers, guided by the principle he had learned the hard way: the sweetest revenge is the success your enemies never believed you could achieve. If this story of transformation touched your heart, subscribe to hear more stories proving that no matter how powerful those who try to break you may be true, strength lies in turning injustice into the fuel to build something greater than anyone ever dared to imagine.